from Global, leading Britain's conversation. The Nigel Farage Show.
Good morning, everybody. It's the middle of August, and of course, traditionally, there aren't many radio and TV programmes focusing on a Sunday on politics, and the members of Parliament are all away on holiday, and we would expect our news to be dominated by great white sharks seen off Bournemouth Beach, panic as people flee from the sea, and nothing very serious being talked about at all. But it's not been like that at all, has it? That article that Boris Johnson wrote in the Daily Telegraph that came out last Monday has led to, firstly, a big national debate that's been going on about free speech. Did he cause offence? And if he did cause offence, well, aren't you allowed in a free society to say things that cause offence provided they don't incite hatred or violence? But the other conversation is becoming clearer and clearer is that the Conservative Party has really got itself into one hell of a pickle over this. Remember the Tory Party chairman, Brandon Lewis, saying he thought it was unacceptable, a disciplinary procedure that has now been launched. Even talk of sending Boris off for diversity training. I would have thought he was actually the mayor of one of the most diverse cities in the world. I wouldn't have thought he needed that. And of course, Theresa May could not resist getting involved and demanding an apology from Boris. The funny thing about all of it, of course, is that Boris's article actually said he did not support a ban on the burqa, such as that was coming in to Denmark. He was actually taking a liberal position, and you could argue his comment about women wearing burqas looking like letterboxes or perhaps bank robbers, you could argue it was just Boris's sense of humour, or was it all a clever calculation? Did he know it was going to lead to this most enormous row? Well, Andrew Bridgen, Tory MP, has said there will be open warfare in the Conservative Party if Boris Johnson is severely disciplined. I think you're a bit late, Andrew Bridgen. I think the open warfare's there already. And then with the Labour Party, well, what can you say? Every single day that goes by, there's a photograph of Jeremy Corbyn seen to be with somebody of a particularly unsavoury nature linked to some Palestinian terror group, and increasing talk about perhaps the formation of a new centre party. So I wonder, do our traditional parties still have their identity? What is the Conservative Party now? I came out of the BBC the other day, and there on the pavement was Ed Vaizey, a Cameroon, standing next to Andrew Bridgen. And I said, well, if I wanted to join the Conservatives, which party would I join, chaps? And neither of them seemed to find it all that funny. I thought it was quite good. And similarly, what is the Labour Party? Is it the party of Tony Blair and New Labour, or is it this very, very different, much to the left form of Corbynism? Well, I wonder, are they losing their identity? Could we even be talking about the prospect of new political parties, maybe even some kind of realignment? Let's go to Professor Sir John Curtis. He's Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde, and he is a veteran commentator and observer of the British political scene, and he may tell me I'm getting overexcited about all this. But, Sir John, good morning to you.
Good morning, Nigel.
Would I be right in thinking that it would be very difficult to find a period of time when both the Labour and Conservative parties were struggling for identity?
Well, I think it's certainly difficult to think of a previous period when any reasonable observer might think that there was good reason to doubt the ability of both of our largest parties to provide us with stable, coherent government. One can certainly think of periods, for example, in the 1980s, when the Labour Party was seriously riven, and one can certainly think of periods, for example, at the beginning of this century, when the Conservative Party was seriously riven. The problem we seem to face now is that both of them are internally seriously divided. Now, not least of the reasons of this, of course, is Brexit. And the reason why Brexit is potentially so disruptive for both of our largest parties is that whether or not you voted Leave or Remain in the 2016 referendum had very little to do, indeed, whether or not you are somebody who's on the left who thinks that Britain's a bit too unequal, or you're somebody on the right who says the priority is to be able to grow the economy. Our parties, Conservative and Labour, are basically set up and organised to articulate and represent that division between left and right. But they now find themselves, however, faced with the division between Remain and Leave. This divides their supporters, and it divides certainly their parliamentary parties, particularly the Conservative Parliamentary Party. Therefore, the problem that we have. And of course, the row about Boris Johnson's comments is in truth, the reason why it has the force as it does is that basically those who are backing Boris are those who are deeply critical of the Chequers Agreement and who thinks that Theresa May's proposal is too soft. And those who are opposing Boris are those who feel that actually this is what's being proposed is a reasonable deal. So it's become a surrogate for the argument that we know is going on inside the Conservative Party, which is whether or not Chequers is, as or is not, an acceptable proposal vis-à-vis our negotiating stance with the European Union.
I mean, given this divide that you talk about, and I mean, I'm with you, I think Brexit is the real key cornerstone of the problem that both parties have got. And given that it's likely to go on for several years to come, and I'm sorry, listeners, but I'm afraid that is the truth of it. Whatever happens, this is not going away quickly. Would it actually be more logical in the end, Sir John, for those who believe in leaving the European Union to sit on one side of the House of Commons and those who believe in staying to sit on the other?
Well, of course, the interesting thing that happened in the 2017 election was the very opposite happened, as it were. UKIP, with which you were once involved, imploded, and the Liberal Democrats, who are clearly the party that's most ardently pro-Remain, also failed to recover from the damage of the coalition between 2010 and 2015. So one could argue that there are already parties there who are set up and are much more united on this issue than either of our two largest parties, but neither of them has been able to make progress, although very recently, since Chequers, we've seen some signs of revival on the UKIP side. But certainly it raises questions about whether or not Conservative and Labour can continue to dominate the electoral landscape in the way that they managed to do in 2017 if these divisions continue. And post-Chequers have already suggested we've already seen some of the Conservative vote slip back towards UKIP. The fascinating thing, of course, is what happens on the Labour side. Now, inside the Labour Party, yes, the division is partly about Brexit, but of course it's also about Jeremy Corbyn, partly people thinking he's too left-wing, and clearly also seeing people thinking he's too pro-Palestinian, and for some people too pro-Russia as well. I think in truth, we aren't going to get a situation where a so-called centre party, which I think by which we really mean a pro-Remain, slightly left-wing party than Jeremy Corbyn's party, is going to emerge simply naturally. I think the real question we're all facing, and to which we don't know the answer, is what is going to happen if indeed on the Conservative side of the fence things collapse, this government is unable to get through the House of Commons, whatever deal it manages to negotiate with the EU, if it manages to negotiate one at all. And against that backdrop, however, the Labour Party also divides, perhaps because Jeremy Corbyn at the end of the day is not willing to accede to what is quite considerable pressure for the party to come out in favour of a second referendum, and maybe even to actually say, well, maybe we should reverse Brexit at all. Whether or not in those circumstances, the chaos of both Conservative and Labour being divided, we end up with an attempt to form a new party. I think it's pretty clear there's moves going on in the backgrounds to make it possible to take advantage should that situation arise. But I think one also has to say very firmly, we are not there yet, and we may not be there. But it's what happens in the next 6 months that's crucial.
Well, if we didn't have the first past the post system, I suspect that it would have happened already. But we have to live with that. And, of course, those of us old enough to remember the SDP know how difficult that is. So, John, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on LBC on this Sunday morning. What John Curtis making it very clear, and I have to say there can't be a more independent voice on the British political scene than him, that, moves are afoot to form a centre party, and the question of whether there is a new party on the centre-right that merges in somehow with UKIP is it depends which way this goes. It depends who wins that battle within the Conservative Party. But are these parties losing their identity? I think they are. I think they're almost unrecognisable. How as a voter can you know which Labour Party you're voting for or which Tory party you're voting for? So let me know what you think. If you're as confused as me, call 0345 6060 973. Or maybe you're from the Lib Dems, the Greens or UKIP and you say, actually, no, we have got firm identities, in which case text to 84850 and tell me, is there room for a new party in the centre and one on the centre right? Let me know by tweeting using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. Watch us on Facebook. Comment there too. Let's ask David in Enfield. David, do you know what our traditional parties stand for?
No.
No, none of us do.
No. It's there's only a couple of dozen in the Tory party now that even resemble Tories, and there's a handful of Labour members that would quite gladly leave that party for some other party. The question that I want to ask is, are you thinking of heading a new party?
David, it's 10:15 on a Sunday morning, and you ask me questions like that. No, I'm not. I mean, I'm watching this with interest. I mean, there is this assumption, David, that if you're Eurosceptic, you're on the right. But of course, that's nonsense, really, isn't it? Because there are millions of people, millions of Labour voters voted Brexit as well. So,
may I make a suggestion?
Go on.
Let's face it. Names of parties matter.
Yep.
So, may I make a suggestion? The FSI party.
The FSI?
FSI, yeah, the Freedom of Speech and Independence Party.
Oh, David, that's way too. Can you imagine that on a billboard? I mean, come on, it's got to be shorter than that, hasn't it?
You've got other parties that are longer than that. The Conservative and Unionist Party. And lots of others. No, because that covers everything. It would get a big vote. That would the Freedom of Speech and Independence Party.
So, David, given that we have a Prime Minister who keeps on saying Brexit means Brexit, how could there be room for a brand new party that wanted Brexit?
That all depends on how many of these Tories are thinking about the country or their party.
And that is a big question, because some of them would think, I might agree in principle, but I don't want to commit electoral suicide. After all, your career in politics matters more than anything, David, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
I'm afraid. David, thank you. What a suggestion there from David, an off-the-shelf idea. Looks a bit of a long name to me, but hey, you're listening to the Sunday edition of The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC, and it's now 16 minutes past 10. Well, John Curtis saying that never before. We've seen periods, you see, when the Labour Party have been in trouble, but the Tories were in power. We've seen the opposite. We've never really seen before both of the parties at each other's throats within the party and without it, and it's really Brexit that's caused all this, and boy, is there some bad feeling. Letter today published in the Sunday Telegraph, written by a man called Jakes Arnold, president of the Tunbridge and Malling Conservative Association, and he says, and by the way, he did serve for a number of years as a Conservative Member of Parliament for Gravesham in North Kent, and he says in his letter, in 50 years of mostly voluntary service to the Conservative Party, I have never known such discourtesy and malevolence. He said, Theresa May has indeed created a nasty party. She is at best an embarrassment, and at worst a humiliation for our great party and country. Enough is enough. She must go. And that coming from somebody who, during his years as an MP and in the Conservative Party, over 10 years as a Member of Parliament, and very much Jakes Arnold would have been regarded as a moderate, a pragmatist, not, as some would say, a head-banging Brexiteer or anything of the kind, but merely expressing, but the way she's handled not just Brexit, but the way she's handled the Boris Johnson affair makes the party look really, really bad. So they've got problems, and Labour, we know those problems are so severe that talks about forming a new centre party with the Liberal Democrats being something of a base are pretty advanced. Indeed, in today's Sunday Times, Stephen Bush, left-wing commentator, Labour supporter, says, despite the swagger, Team Corbyn fears one thing: a breakaway party. So those conversations are really pretty advanced. Let's go to Barry from Paisley, who's a new caller to this show. Good morning, Barry.
Good morning, Nigel. How are you?
I am very well. So, looking at this from north of the border, maybe with the SNP, you've got a slightly clearer identity of what they're for?
Well, listen, I've looked on Facebook this morning. I've seen the headline of traditional political parties losing their identity.
Yeah.
And I would certainly agree, which is the reason that I've called.
Yeah.
I live in Scotland. I'm currently paying my £1 per month membership to the SNP.
Uh-huh.
I have been for the last few years, pretty much since the referendum. But now that'll be getting cancelled. I disagree now with many of their policies, but I think just going back to that headline about political parties losing their identity, I'm 36 years old and I'm kind of struggling at this minute in time because I don't know what party to start looking towards because...
Barry, don't worry. Don't feel lonely, Barry, from Paisley. There are millions of people feeling like you this morning.
Yeah, I know. There's certain policies with the SNP that I do agree with, certain policies with UKIP that I agree with, certain policies...
Where do you stand, Barry? Where do you stand on the whole issue of the Brexit referendum?
Well, listen, I voted to remain.
Uh-huh.
But I was actually just saying to my partner just this morning that I think I made the wrong choice when I voted to remain.
OK, so you now... Is that the issue that's put you at odds with your SNP membership?
Immigration has put me mainly at odds with my SNP membership.
OK.
I've staunchly became... not so much against immigration because I do believe we need controlled immigration, but the right type of immigration that I think this country needs.
Which, of course, is very closely linked to the Brexiteers' argument in 16, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is. It's one of these ones, Nigel. Who does a 36-year-old man vote for at the next general election?
See, if there was a new party, Barry, if there was a new party that said that the people had voted on Brexit and they would absolutely unequivocally carry out what the people had asked for, that it would give us an Australian-style point system where immigration could be seen to be a very good thing, provided we controlled the quantity and quality of those who came, do you think you'd vote for it?
I think I would vote for it on the provision that there was a policy that was very closely linked to UKIP's policy around the Islamisation of this country as well. OK. Barry,
thank you for your call. And interesting, wasn't it? Barry sort of almost like confessing on the radio that he's not quite sure who to vote for. Believe you me, Barry, you are not on your own. A lot of people feel like that. What does Nikki in Dorchester think? Good morning, Nikki.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Regarding this new party that they're talking about, etc.
Uh-huh.
Well, if MPs became what I call reconnected with their constituents,
yep.
In other words, in my opinion, they spend far too much time in the bubble of Parliament.
Uh-huh.
Now, just put aside the last general election, which I feel was Brexit influenced.
Uh-huh.
Previous general elections, less people are voting because they're becoming dissatisfied, disillusioned, and lost faith in their MPs because we cannot talk to them.
Well, you say that, Nikki, but I mean, your local MP down there in Dorset will have, you can write to them, you can email them, you can...
Don't you think I've done Oliver Letwin? Don't you think I've tried?
All right, so talk me through it then.
They're busy. They're busy with other... But if they became, spent more time in their constituencies,
mm-hmm.
they would be able to contact or see or, discuss with their constituents, and also it would make them more accountable.
Well, the disconnect, Nikki, it's very interesting, isn't it? So Theresa May says Boris's comments about the burqa are wrong, he must apologise, and yet 60% of the country don't just agree that Boris had the right to say those things. 60% of the country, Nikki, want the burqa banned. So there are issues like this, aren't there, where actually the constituents and the members of Parliament are just miles apart.
Well, that's what I'm saying. And to combat or to counteract that, they need to spend more time with their constituents.
OK, no, Nikki, got the point. Spend more time with your constituents. as an MEP, I've done my best to get round as many public houses as I possibly can in an effort to meet my constituents. Unless we change the first-past-the-post system, this is just all hot air, and I doubt that will ever happen because Labour and the Tories know they'll be finished if they allow it to. Johnny in Norfolk, they may know they'll be finished if they allow it, doesn't stop the creation of those new parties. And you are right about first past the post, of course. You know, we saw this with the SDP back in the early 80s, the Gang of Four leaving the Labour Party, very senior people, you know, polling high 20s percentage-wise in a general election, but not quite making that breakthrough. The fact that it's difficult, Johnny, doesn't mean that it won't happen. Theresa May conveniently forgets that some people only lent their vote to the Conservatives partly from UKIP. Well, yes, there were people who'd voted UKIP in the previous few years who voted May because they believed her Brexit means Brexit stance, and I think they are pretty cheesed off right now. But we don't yet know who's going to win. You know, maybe we are going to leave the European Union. Maybe Theresa May will say we've finally actually got a very good deal out of all this. If she does, then the prospect of a new party based on Brexit will probably disappear. But the prospect of one based on Remain, and as John Curtis said, opposition to Corbyn as a left-wing Labour leader, that I don't think does go away. And Johnny, I'm going to say this to you, I think there will be a new coming together of a centre party around the Liberal Democrats. I don't think, in electoral terms, it'll go to the moon, but I do think that it will happen. Andrew is calling from Totnes in Devon. Good morning.
Oh, good morning to you. I'm just ringing in to say, really, I think that Mrs May has got Brexit absolutely spot on. And I think this agreement is absolutely spot on.
Do you?
And because of that, I don't think there's going to be any substantial realignment. And let me explain why. What Mrs May is actually proposing is what I would refer to as a de Valera Brexit. You've obviously heard of Eamon de Valera, a very clever Irish politician.
Yep.
It took, after the establishment of the Irish Free State in 1922, it took nearly 26 years for the Irish Republic to actually emerge. And it was all a series of incremental steps before it finally emerged, all negotiated pretty much by Eamon de Valera. And that's what this Chequers agreement is all about. It's basically saying this is the beginning. A relationship that's 40 years old is going to take a very long time to disestablish. And this Chequers agreement is the basis of the beginning of that. Effectively, what we're establishing is our Irish Free State. And after this, it's going to be a series, as I say, of incremental steps which will slowly diverge us from the European Union.
Andrew, I get the historical, analogy, and it's a very interesting one, that it did take time for Ireland to be fully independent. I mean, and to get their own currency, and of course to be surrendered to the euro. The difference is, Andrew, that the Irish Free State, they were starting, they'd not had self-government before. What we are trying to do, Andrew, is to re-establish it. But also, Andrew, how does Chequers work when Mrs May in her Lancaster House speech said much the opposite?
Well, I agree with you. I agree with you, but I know exactly. I know that there have been conflicting signals, etc.
Just a bit.
Yes, I accept all of that. But I do think that that this Chequers agreement, the proposals that she's outlined, are basically the final. They are the final offer. And as I say, I think
I wish I believed it. Andrew, I wish I believed it. I really do. I thank you for your point. It's a very interesting one. Don't get many calls in favour of Chequers. Have one there from Andrew in Totnes. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It is now 10:31. Are our political parties losing their identity? What does the Conservative Party stand for? Is it Conservative anymore? And what is the Labour Party? Is it Corbyn's Labour? Is it New Labour? A lot of you seem very confused. I'm asking you, is there maybe room for new parties, maybe room for a realignment? But before I get back to that, overnight you'll have heard the news. There has been a shooting in the Moss Side area of Manchester. 10 people are in hospital with injuries described as from minor to major. Let's go to LBC's reporter Ellie Linford, who is there at the scene. Good morning, Ellie.
Good morning, Nigel. So the scene here at the minute is that police have been coming here more and more across the morning. There's still rubbish lining the streets from this Caribbean carnival that had been happening, and the cordon off section of the street is just metres from Alexandra Park, which is where the festival is meant to be taking place in the next few hours.
And Ellie, do we know was this just one gun? Was it people shooting at each other with innocent bystanders in the way? Do we have any sense of what the shooting incident was?
There has been no information on that, just that gunshots were heard around 2:30 this morning. Police are saying that they don't know that there's a link between the carnival and the shooting, just that there were a lot of people. And I've spoken to residents here, and they've said every year the party does continue into the early hours with people on this street in Moss Side carrying on the party. And it's that amount of people, which is why there were 10 people that are in hospital at the minute.
And does this festival continue today, albeit with heavier policing?
Well, this is what we don't know. I haven't heard anything from the organisers, but just a lot of people around here are just speculating that it won't happen and that it might not happen again. And it's happened for the last 40 years. And this year especially, it's been 70 years since Windrush, so it's been a big festival with thousands of people here in this multicultural part of Manchester.
OK, Ellie Linford, thank you very much indeed. Well, it would appear very little information being given. We don't even know whether it was a handgun, sawn-off shotgun, who was involved. If we hear any more on that story, you'll be the first to hear it here on LBC. Back to our political parties. Jackie from Cambridge says, the Conservatives and Labour are in name only. They have lost respect and identity. We need a new People's Party. I shan't be voting unless I get one that represents us. Helen says to me on Twitter, there's a fair number of people I'd choose over our current Prime Minister, and one of them definitely isn't Corbyn. Boris couldn't do a worse job. Well, I wouldn't say, Helen, that's a wholesale endorsement, but I can tell the direction that you're going in. Tim is calling from Evesham in Worcestershire. Tim, tell me, who are the Conservatives? Who are Labour today?
Morning, Nigel.
Good morning.
Pleasure to speak to you. I just think there's one big problem in this country. That's a humanless, hapless vicar's daughter. She's got to go. We've got to get rid of her. She's making us a laughing stock around the world. And while she's there, we're finished.
Do you know, Tim, I've been saying this, I don't know whether you're a regular listener, but I've been saying this for months. I have said again and again, I think she's the worst Prime Minister I've seen in my lifetime. And I do get quite a lot of people saying to me, oh, come on, give her a break, be fair. And in fact, we had, before the break, a caller from Devon telling us that actually Chequers is a master plan. But you've just, are you a Tory voter, Tim, normally? I'm
a Tory voter. I have also voted for UKIP in European elections.
Right, yeah, there's quite a lot of people in your category. Well, let me ask you, Tim, all the while she's there, trying to please everybody, she's finishing up pleasing nobody, it seems to me. But why, Tim? Why have they not got rid of her already? I have to let you go, Tim. That line is falling to pieces. Let's ask David in Uxbridge. David, good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Nigel. I'd like to give an alternative view to the Labour Party. I think there are a cohort of Labour MPs who are very vehemently anti-Corbyn, and they've got very close links to their friends in the media. So I think there's an inflation here. I'm not saying, they would prefer a Tory government to a Corbyn radical social democratic. So that's clear. And I think a lot of the stories, the anti-Semitism one, there is a problem in Labour, but there's a problem across society. I don't believe it's no more. So I think things are inflated, the division. And you have to know, Nigel, the support for Corbyn is solid. There's 600,000 new members in. Economically, he's aligned with the British people on privatisation, on food banks, anti-poverty, on the NHS. And that's why a lot of the media don't want to talk about these issues, really. It's here to talk about Burqa.
But David,
how much airtime has Burqa had? Come on, Nigel.
Well, a lot. And I tell you why, David. It raises fundamental questions, not just about how the Conservative Party and the Prime Minister manage things, but it has also raised, David, I think, a very healthy debate about the burqa, its significance within the religion of Islam, and how we all feel about it. So, David, funny enough, I think it's been a good week for those that want to talk about issues like free speech and integration.
Yeah, I'll give you another issue we could have talked about. Why are we funding Saudi Arabia to kill children in Yemen? Why are we not talking about that? BAE Systems, the Tory party, big business, funding massacres in Yemen. How
Well, David, I think when it comes to foreign policy, when it comes to our direct or indirect involvement in a whole series of wars, I think both parties have a bit of a problem on this, and neither wants to talk about it very much. David, I get your point that there are over 500,000 members of the Labour Party and that Corbyn and the left have total support amongst that group of people. I totally agree with that. But when you say that Corbyn and Labour's anti-Semitism problems, well, let's not worry about it. There's plenty of anti-Semitism in the country. I mean, come on. This leader, meets people like Hamas and Hezbollah and calls them friends.
Nigel, I didn't say it's not a problem. I didn't say it's... I think racism, anti-Semitism is a serious problem, but it's no... I don't think the Labour Party is unique, and I think there's an over-focus on that. I'm sorry, David,
but Corbyn's links and associations with people of terror has been too strong for me. David, I thank you. Let's go to Cindy, a new caller from Ilford. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Nigel. It's lovely to speak to you at long last.
Well, I'm very... has it taken you ages to get through, Cindy, or wasn't it too bad?
No, not really. No,
right, good.
Fine.
Well, hey, your first time on the show, the floor is yours.
Yes, it is. Thank you. Well, I just don't recognise either party. I think basically neither of them are fit for purpose anymore. I would never consider voting for them again. Theresa May was Home Secretary for a very long time, and during that time she achieved very, very little. Now it seems that she's selling this country down the road over Brexit, so I have no confidence. One of your callers, or you said to one of your callers, why don't they get rid of her?
Yeah.
I think the answer to that question is they're all worried about their jobs, hanging on by their fingernails, and nobody has got the guts to stand up to her. And I think the last straw also was calling Boris Johnson out and expecting him to apologise. What is happening to our freedom of speech in this country?
Well, she's really misjudged this, Cindy, hasn't she? I mean, there's some polling in the Sunday Express today. 53% of the country think Boris should not apologise for what he said. 40% think he should. Would Cindy, I mean, as somebody who clearly, I can tell from your tone, believes in Brexit, etc.,
yes.
Would you see, would Boris solve this problem for you?
I'm not certain that he would, but what I would like to see is yourself coming back, a man of principle, and sorting this sorry mess out for us. I have voted for UKIP when you were leader.
Well, Cindy, thank you for that. This whole sorry mess, as you called it, does need a fair bit of sorting out. Cindy, I thank you very much for that point of view. At the local elections, none of the bigger parties gave any indications of who they were or how they deviated from the National Party. So why do we believe they have any interest in getting the opinions of the electorate? We are just a means of earning money. Once in power, we don't count, says a very cynical Alf from Halifax. Alf? Tell you what, you're not on your own feeling like that. You really aren't. You're listening to the Sunday edition of Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, and it's now 10:45. Well, both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party now spend more time fighting within the party than they do fighting each other's party. Latest voting intentions show the Conservatives on 39%, Labour on 35%. And a very dramatic headline in The Observer, Brexit shift. More than 100 Leave seats now back Remain. Gosh, I thought this must be big stuff, and I listened to a variety of news reports talking about this polling and what it meant, until I discovered that actually there was no polling done at all. No, zero. Not a single person was asked by The Observer or the people that sponsored this particular headline. In fact, what they did, and I'm quoting here, is they got data scientists to compile the study using a technique known as multi-level regression. I'm not making this up. Multi-level regression and post-stratification. So there you go, folks. That's what you get. They haven't actually polled anybody, although I will say this. given the constant diet of negativity that we see through our media almost every single day, and an absence of leadership and a feeling of betrayal by many Brexit voters, there are some out in the country who voted Brexit who are saying, is it ever going to happen? Is it worth the bother? And that is what the Brexit movement now needs. It needs leadership. It needs to get reactivated. Back to this question. Only Boris and Jacob can save the Tories and Brexit, says Sheila. Well, Sheila, that's fine, but remember that Dominic Grieve has said that if Boris became Tory party leader, he would leave the party, all of which, of course, would make that new centre party even more likely. Correspondingly, if the Chequers deal continues and there's more of a sellout, there'll be more chance of a merger between UKIP and those who actually do want us to leave the European Union. So it is tough to predict what will happen. Nigel, I was raised in a socialist stronghold. I will never vote for a socialist. Well, Pablo, something obviously put you off along the way. Not losing, but lost their identities. Labour now have nothing to do with working people. The Conservatives don't believe in conservative values at all. The Lib Dems are more like a totalitarian party with do what we say. Julia, I won't comment on the Lib Dem bit, but I do actually think, had a lot of callers in the week saying that as Corbyn has taken Labour much to the left, actually under Theresa May, the Conservatives have moved quite a substantial way to the left, and they are not recognisable as a Conservative party in any way at all. Labour are recognisable now as a socialist party, but many would say that it was the much softer brand of third way politics and socialism under Blair that actually gave them electoral success, and those two wings are very much at war with each other. Michael is a brand new caller from Warren Point in Northern Ireland. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Nigel. How are you? Good to talk to you.
I'm well. Now, obviously, politics in Northern Ireland is very different, with the DUP Sinn Féin dominating the landscape.
Yeah, it's completely different here. I am not a political person myself, Nigel. I always exercise my vote, but I tend to do that on looking at the candidate. Like the vast majority of people here, we just get on with our lives. Politics didn't affect us all of that much. Well, it did during the Troubles, of course.
Well, Warren Point was the scene of one of the worst incidents, wasn't it?
It was indeed, yeah. But we have a very mixed community, a great community spirit here. Thankfully, none of the sectarian blight that was in other parts affected us here. It's a great place to live in.
You're in. It's South Down. You're in, isn't it?
We're in South Down.
Yeah. Now I've been there. I've been there, Michael. I've been there,
yeah,
and
it's a gorgeous part of the country.
It always struck me. It always struck me in South Down that it was one of the parts of Northern Ireland where Protestants and Catholics seem to coexist pretty happily.
Yeah. No, we have a great place here. It's beautiful scenery. You should all come over where the mountains of Mourne sweep down to the sea.
I know it's pretty special. But
we're right on the border. I could kick a football over to the south, and we're an hour from Belfast, an hour from Dublin.
Yeah.
We live in the north. I work in the north, and my wife works in the south. She commutes over every day. We go back and forth all of the time. And you see, this is the whole thing with Brexit, and what frustrates me so much is that the only thing that people are talking about on both sides of the Irish Sea is the effect that it will have on trade and the effect that it will have on the financial thing, and they don't look at ordinary people and the effect that it will have on our lives. And from my point of view, when you look even in terms of health, we'll lose the E111. So for...
Well, not Michael. Hang on. We can have reciprocity on health if we choose to do so.
Nigel, we can have all sorts of things, but I'm talking about on what's going to happen on the 30th of March. Is that I will lose my 111, and I don't know when.
You don't know, Michael. You don't know that.
Will come back.
You don't know that, Michael.
Yeah. No, but we don't know when it will come back. So, say for example, my mother.
Well, what about the 30th of March? If you were told that comes back on the 30th of March, would you be reassured?
But there's nobody can tell me that. I'm just giving you one example, Nigel, right? My mother goes across, both my sisters live in Dublin, so every week my mother jumps on a train, has her free transport, because that works across the border, and is covered by health across the border. It's going to be impossible for her. She's in her 80s, health insurance is going to be huge. In terms of my own qualification, I'm a pharmacist, my wife is a teacher. We're entitled to, our qualifications are recognised on both sides of the border. The Irish Pharmacy Union brought out an ad last month saying that after 29th of March, it is unlikely that our qualification will...
Disgraceful scare tactics that being put out. That really is bad. Michael, what you need is some leadership, isn't it? You need the British government to tell you what is going to happen. You are right there on the border, and I understand. But, you talked about how within your community, Protestant and Catholic get on very, very well, and I've seen that for myself. But equally, live and let live extends to that border, doesn't it? Because already you've got a different currency over the border, different income tax rates, different corporation tax rates, different VAT regimes. You manage those differences now, Michael, don't you?
We do, Nigel, yeah. But
very effectively. Very effectively.
But Nigel, the whole thing with respect is that it can't be seen as being the same as what has happened. The impact on us on a daily life basis will be completely different to what will happen to you over in England.
No. I mean, there are 65 million people in the United Kingdom, and I mean, what would you estimate on that border? 50,000 people very directly affected by this?
No, it's going to affect in one way or another everybody. In the island of Ireland, it's going to affect.
So why don't the Irish government stop being spokesman for the European Commission and start to argue for grown-up reciprocal agreements?
Well, Nigel, that's not for me. I'm not involved with the Irish. I'm not involved with any political party. But I think one thing that yourself and myself can both agree on, right, is number one, that it will have a greater impact on the Irish people, north and south, than it will on people living over in England.
It may do. It may do.
Brexit, through one way or another, it will have a bigger impact on us.
It may do.
And the second thing is that the vast majority of people here, both north and south, are against Brexit, and as this is being imposed on us.
Well, I wouldn't be so sure about that, Michael. I saw the Lisbon Treaty be rejected by the Irish people, so there's a fair bit of Euroscepticism in Ireland too. Michael, listen, fascinating conversation, and it is a much more complex situation, and you're more worried about this than many others. I understand why. You need more leadership. Phil on Facebook says, Labour appear no longer to be interested in the white working class. A lot of people say that. Let's take one more caller on this subject before the top of the hour. Let's go to Andy, a new caller from Reading. Good morning, Andy.
Good morning, Nigel. How are you?
I'm very well. So can you tell me what the Labour Party stands for now and what the Tory Party stands for?
Well, I know what they say they stand for.
Right.
My view is we're in a political malaise generally. Basically, I'm looking at Brexit. The people of Great Britain and Northern Ireland were asked to make a decision. Should we stay in Europe or should we leave? We chose to leave. Now, beyond that, it's up to our civil servants and administrators to work out the detail, which I hope they are doing. But we are in a political malaise. I voted for every party we have, basically. I look at what they're offering, look at my circumstances, and I say, what's going to suit me best? If they decide to follow what they say they're going to do. And sometimes they do what they say they're going to do, and sometimes they don't.
So as a floater, Andy, you are the classic floating voter, and you're not aligned tribally with any political party. What do you think we need now? You've got 20 seconds to tell me what we now need to fix this broken system.
We want a reform of the House of Lords to make it a proper reforming chamber with no conflict with the Commons, who are voted by the people of this country. We need to tell the politicians to get their act together, earn their gold-plated pensions, You know, I understand they work hard, but they need to understand what we want. We want to be prosperous. We want to work. We want to have a good life in this country.
That'll do, Andy. That'll do. As a parting message, that's what we want. I think, actually, Andy, everyone wants that. Thank you. Right, moving on. Boris Johnson has re-emerged on the political scene as he flew back into Gatwick Airport yesterday after a 6-day break in Italy. Meanwhile, the Tory party are really seriously split on the former Foreign Secretary's remarks. Comres poll today tells us that 60% of people say free speech is under threat. 53% don't think Johnson should be disciplined for his comments, and 60% of people believe that our rights of free speech have been weakened. So do you think freedom of speech is under threat? Let me know. 0345 6060 973. Maybe you don't. Text to 84850. Tell me, what are the limits of free speech? Tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and of course, watch us on Facebook. Well, it's been quite a week, hasn't it? Ever since those comments of Boris's in the Daily Telegraph on Monday of this week, when, in what was supposed to be a very liberal article on culture, he said that he would not himself want to see the burqa banned, but thought that women who wore the burqa looked ridiculous and compared them to letterboxes or, at worst, bank robbers. And it was. It's kind of the way Boris speaks about things. Could he have anticipated exactly the scale of row that this would have led to? I honestly don't think so. I mean, he obviously knew it would have caused a furore. But actually, folks, I think that what's happened this week has been good, because we're having a debate about free speech and what its limits are. And with my midweek show with LBC, we've been doing this every single evening, and I stand by my view that in a free society, you should be able to say things that offend other people, provided they are not insightful. And I've had enough of this politics where everyone's frightened of causing offence to anybody and no one says a blooming thing, and you finish up with some real dullards in politics, and most of the front benches of both parties, you know, the public couldn't pick them out of a lineup. We want people who say what they think. We've also, I think, begun to have, for the first time, a healthy debate about the burqa. Now, back in 2010, I started talking about this to be sort of effectively steamrollered by the political and media classes and told that I had no right to even speak on the issue. What did I understand of it? But it's really interesting to see so many commentators, so many Muslim commentators, and we've had a lot of Muslim callers this week saying they themselves are not comfortable with the burqa. They see it as being repressive. So tell me, do you think, with all that's happened and with Boris now facing potential disciplinary action, do you think freedom of speech is under threat? Because I, in many ways, do think that it is. If you agree with me, call 0345 6060 973. If you think no, let's not get hysterical, we can still speak our minds, Boris just went too far, then text to 84850. And tell me, what responsibilities does freedom of speech come with? And you can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and you can watch and comment, of course, on Facebook too. Well, earlier on this morning, I spoke to Omar El Hamdoun, and he was the former president of the Muslim Association of Great Britain and the former Deputy Secretary General at the Muslim Council of Britain. And I wanted to find out whether he thought freedom of speech had been eroded. But first, I started by asking him, was he offended by Boris's comments?
I think, I'm not personally offended, but I'm offended for the people who are obviously going to be at the end of all this, these comments. There are people who are going to suffer because of comments like this. So I suppose I would be offended because people are actually other people have taken offence to it.
Yeah, and we saw 100 burqa-wearing women writing to the Conservative Party chairman. So yeah, sure, some people did take offence at this, but is it not reasonable to say that within our culture and in our belief of free speech, that actually people are allowed to say things that some people take offence at?
I think this whole aspect of, the freedom to offend obviously has been discussed many times, and no doubt we do have freedoms of speech, but I think like most of the freedoms that we have in the West especially are limited freedoms. It remains that we can say things, but we have to be responsible about what we say. So even if we under freedom of speech, for example, we wouldn't be saying things that are going to incite people to hatred or violence or indeed terrorism. So we do have a responsibility, and it becomes even doubly more responsible when somebody is in a position of authority or a position of public standing. So there is freedom, but I think it has to be also responsible and sensible.
OK, no, I completely understand your point that freedom of speech does not include incitement. And Boris's defenders very much say this was Boris's sense of humour. It was Boris's way of saying things, that actually the article was much more liberal than where most of public opinion is. I mean, do you think that Boris in any way may have excited distrust of the Muslim community?
I think he has, because obviously using terms like this, which is describing the women who wear their burqa as letterboxes or bank robbers, obviously is going to cause other people. It brings the Muslim women, those women who are wearing the burqa, and indeed any Muslim woman, even women who wear hijab and don't cover their face, is going to bring them under the spotlight. And people who have, get excited or are easily excited about comments like this, those people have the tendency to exert hatred towards others, are going to use comments like this to feed off it, if you like. So I think Muslim women have suffered a lot in the UK, and comments like this really do not help. They just make things worse. And I think somebody's also mentioned, I don't know whose name, but a superintendent has also said that there is increase of hate when comments like this are made. So there is definitely some sort of evidence to support that.
But on the burqa itself, I mean, there have been a lot of Muslim commentators over the course of the last week have come out and said again and again that nowhere in the Quran does it expressly say people should wear a burqa. And other commentators from the Muslim community saying, actually, the wearing of this garment of itself is causing increased division within our society. Where do you stand specifically on the burqa?
I think it's very important to understand, first of all, that as Muslims, we have our religion is not just based on the Quran. The Quran is an important source of religious practice, but the Quran is not the only source. So there is other sources, and through centuries of religious and scholarly discourse, people have made that conclusion that, or certain scholars, not all of them obviously, have said that burqa is part of the religion, and others would argue that it isn't. So it remains that there is a religious opinion to support it, and furthermore, then, if a person, whether it's a woman in this case, understands this religious instruction, then there should be a freedom for that woman to practice her religion. I mean, I personally do not encourage women to wear the burqa in the UK, because I don't feel, the idea of the burqa, if we want to take it from a really sort of basic perspective, is to detract attention, detract attention away from you. But in this case, it's actually bringing attention to
it is. So, wouldn't we have better relations between the Muslim community and everybody else if fewer women wore burqas?
I don't know. This is the kind of thing that obviously it's maybe more research needs to be done on this. But I think that, first of all, the number of women that wear burqa is very, very small, and to actually have any real effects on the whole issues of society, the whole issue of integrations are much, much more complex than just what women wear on their face. So I don't think that's necessarily the issue, but definitely having vision of a face does affect people's perception, and I understand that in many ways,
And overall, I understand the comments that you've made, and very reasonable ones too. Do you think more broadly that freedom of speech in this country is now facing a real problem?
I don't think it is. I think what's happening there, what we've seen, especially in maybe the last decade or two, is that, especially through the media, there's been a lots of bad behavior, unfortunately. And I think it's very right for us as a society to tell people who, whenever they speak, and especially when they write articles or come out on public outlets, that they are sensible in what they say, sensible in how they present their cases, because today everybody's words will have a ripple effect. So if your word, even though you under the pretext of freedom of speech, if it's going to cause people harm, it's going to cause people distress, and it's real, then you should be sensible about not saying these things. However, I do understand that people have the freedom to say what they want, and obviously people have the freedom to offend, although I disagree with that we should just go around offending people maybe for the sake of it. And whether Boris has other political intentions behind it, that's a different argument.
Well, that's an interesting point. I mean, you've held some very senior positions within the Muslim community in this country. Yeah. What if, in a few months' time, it's Boris Johnson Prime Minister? Will the Muslim community and all the organisations that represent them, will they be happy to do business with Boris as the PM?
Well, I think everybody, I mean, in the day, the world carries on. You can remember how Boris Johnson even spoke negatively about Donald Trump before he came in.
He certainly did, yes.
And then when he was elected, he had to deal with him as the foreign secretary. So I think in the day, business carries on. Obviously, Boris has to be more responsible. He's had senior leadership positions as the mayor of London, obviously, and meant that Muslims had to deal with him and engage with him. And I think it really is important that he does tone down, or at least become a little bit more sensible and a little bit more aware of people around him, and the comments that he makes do affect them.
Well, there we are. That was Omar El Hamdoun, former president of the Muslim Association of Britain and former Deputy Secretary General at the Muslim Council of Britain. So somebody who has held very senior positions in the Muslim community in this country. Yes, he thought that Boris's comments had caused offence, but he wasn't hysterical about it. He did talk about rights of free speech. He also, interestingly, said he would not encourage Muslim women in this country to wear the burqa, and many commentators, since Monday, since this row blew up, many commentators have come out and said that, and I actually think that we're having a good political debate right in the middle of what normally is the August silly season. And I'm particularly keen to hear, in this first part of this hour, particularly keen to hear from Muslim callers, tell me, was it reasonable for Boris to say the things that he did? And if he's going to be disciplined with the Conservative Party, isn't our free speech seriously under threat? Mohan is calling from Peterborough in Cambridgeshire. Good morning to you.
Nigel, good morning. Nigel, a couple of weeks ago there was a march in London where 100,000 people expressed freedom of speech against one person. He was mocked, he was ridiculed, there was balloons made of him. And now all of a sudden, freedom of speech is taboo. And I'm a British Asian, and it seems to me that, unfortunately, we have one fireproof subject. We cannot talk about Islam. It's fireproof. We can't really...
Well, that has been the case, Mohan. That has been the case, I know, and I agree with that. And anyone that dares to talk about it gets shot down. But don't you agree with me that actually the debate I've just had with Omar El Hamdoun, that actually there is now a healthy debate about Islam going on, I think.
There certainly is. And Nigel, next time you have a lady on there who says she's proud to wear the burqa and it's her freedom of choice, can I just ask you two questions to ask her?
Right.
One is, if it's good enough for her to show modesty, why isn't it good enough for the men to show modesty? And the second question I'd like to get them, when they say, would you ever remove your veil or your burqa? And they say, no, never. When they go to Mecca, to go to Hajj, everybody is required to remove any garment at all, face garment. You are not, in the holiest of holy places, you cannot go around there with a veil on.
I know.
I asked this to a chap the other day who was actually quite a liberal Muslim, and I asked him why, and he said, well, the reason they do it there, they say to themselves, everybody there is a Muslim, he's like a brother, a sister, a mother, a father, so we can show our face. The reason they don't want to do it here is because we are all infidels. We are kafirs, we are non-believers. So that is the reason why they don't want to show their face to us.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a view. I mean, Mohan, tell me, would you ban the burqa, Mohan?
Definitely.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Now that makes you a dangerous extremist, along with 60% of the British public. Which I think is the interesting thing about this row, is that actually there's so many people who feel as Mohan does. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It is now 18 minutes past 11. I make no bones about it. I have been defending Boris since Monday and defending his right to say what he did. I genuinely believe that in a free society you should be able to say things that cause offence to other people, providing they are not insightful. And I think so much over the last few years, our politicians have been told, oh, don't say that, you might offend somebody. And you finish up with politicians not really saying anything. So I've been right on his side all the way through. And the family are riding to the rescue this morning. Stanley Johnson, Boris's father. Boris was spot on, but he should have gone further and said ban the burqa. Rachel Johnson, his sister, saying much the same thing in the Mail on Sunday, talking about the burqa and how oppressive it is. From his brother Joe Johnson, well, he's got a ministerial job, so we've heard nothing from him. We really do, actually. Let's go to Michael in Croydon. Michael, good morning. Does, Boris now facing disciplinary action, possible suspension or expulsion, I doubt it, but possible expulsion from the Conservative Party. Is our freedom of speech slipping away, Michael?
Morning, Nigel. Pleasure to speak to you.
Good morning.
Well, myself, I'm a Left-leaning person. In my mind, I think I'm a bit of a hippie, although I don't live like one.
Right.
I've got a lot of friends who probably wouldn't even speak to you, and that's the problem with the left at the moment. They don't engage. So when Boris Johnson says this stuff, the whole world goes crazy.
Yeah.
When there's other things about that's happened in the Muslim community that people fell silent on. However, that's relative. I believe Boris Johnson, as an MP, a prominent MP, or just an MP, should not be making jokes about people like that. I think it
should not be making jokes.
No.
So should we ban humour as well then, Michael?
No. Listen, hear me out, Nigel. Not Boris Johnson, not you, not Theresa May, not Jeremy Corbyn. You've got a powerful, beautiful position to lead people, empower people, make people feel protected. Don't single people out. However, David Chappelle, Larry David, Peter Kay, Frankie Boyle, crack on. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Well, I get what you're saying, although isn't it interesting that the Edinburgh Festival's going on at the moment, of course, up in Scotland, and there are 8 different plays about Brexit that are being put on at the moment up there, and every single one of them is coming at it from an anti-Brexit point of view. And the trouble, the trouble, Michael, with comedians is that Conservative comedians lose all their gigs, get banned from venues, but you can be as far left as you like and get away with it. So there is a problem here, actually, in comedy.
Nigel, I'll email you some comedians who just believe in freedom of speech, and they'll talk to anyone.
Okay, but Michael, do you get my do you get my broader point? Do you get my broader point?
Well, the point is still kind of relative. I do believe that on the left, we are moaning too much at the moment over lots of things. People, for example, the best example is Brexit. You're racist if you vote Brexit. Yeah, that's the narrative that the left push, and it's just disgusting, and it doesn't allow for any political discourse. It's really bad, and do you know what I mean? Finally, so you see where I'm coming from.
No, I do.
Everyone should.
But Michael, can I ask you? And by the way, you make a sort of self-critical point about the left. That's a very, very important one, and I thank you for that. Yeah. Can I ask you something? Did you march against Donald Trump the other week in London?
Of course not. That's ridiculous. Yeah. Donald Trump is someone who I believe is. There's think tanks out there. There's think tanks out there. There's sociologists. It's obvious now that if you sort of push yourself far left or far right, you're probably going to get yourself a loyal supporter who's going to be with you forever. And that's the base that people are going from. And I think that's what Trump's doing. That's what Corbyn's doing with this crazy anti-Semite stuff. I mean, how crazy, I think they must be doing it on purpose. They're not stupid. Trump's not stupid. Corbyn's not stupid.
Well, it's called pitching to the base, Michael. That's the argument, is that you pitch to the base and they become even more loyal supporters of yours. That's the theory.
Nigel, you're a learned person. You know that left-leaning young person, like the quite educated ones, they are quite conspiracy-minded, and they think Jews run the world, etc., etc., and that's who he's pandering towards. They're clever people.
We better make sure the education system teaches them a bit more modern history, really, Michael, oughtn't we? Listen, Michael, thank you for your call. Very interesting. Your message is coming through. Karen says, anyone who speaks out is now called far right. Michael says, I'm offended by the burqa, so do I deserve an apology? Darren says, at least you know where Boris stands. Hardly any of the others stand for anything. Darren, that's not just message of a day, it's message of the week. I agree with you. Stephen says Boris has been offensive. Stephen, some people do think Boris has been offensive. I agree with it, fine. I agree that some people have taken offence. But the argument here is that if you believe in free speech, you should be able to cause offence. I believe in this very strongly, and Tina says don't apologise, Boris, and puts herself very much indeed with the majority. We're going to go up to Perth and Kinross, to Aberfeldy, to speak to Jason. Jason, do you think freedom of speech is being impinged upon?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. I don't really understand your analysis either.
Well, here's Boris Johnson, who has written an article, a very liberal article, way to the left of where the British population are, of course, on the burqa. But he's made a couple of asides. And
a couple of asides?
Well, yes, he said he absolutely doesn't think the burqa should be banned, and that puts him...
But you see, Jacob did this yesterday as well. You like to shimmy to a broader discussion about the burqa, the hijab. And what fascinates me, you said, you were surprised that Omar wasn't hysterical earlier. I mean, the point about this
No.
The offence he causes is not freedom of speech to describe black people as pickaninnies.
No, Jason, right? Jason, most of the country, Jason...
You can't just say Boris is being Boris,
Most of the country, Jason, wants to ban the burqa, right?
It's not about that, and you know it's not about that.
Well, it is about that, of course it is.
It's not about that.
Well, of course it is.
What it's about, and the upset that's been caused, Omar articulated perfectly to you, so I'm surprised that it slipped through your fingers,
is
it's the offence to individuals. I would almost invite you to define two things for me. Empathy, on the one hand, and opportunism on the other.
Right. I mean, Jason, do you think, Jason, and you feel very strongly on this, and that's good, but do you think it's right, that Boris Johnson, and you can disapprove of it, sure, I get that, but do you think it's right that he should be allowed to say something that causes offence without being disciplined for doing so?
Okay, the slippery concept of causing offence. So what's offensive in your book? Is describing black people as pickaninnies, is that offensive to you?
That would be offensive, outdated language, yes.
Watermelon mouths, is that offensive to you?
Yes.
Quoting Kipling in a Mima temple, is that offensive to you?
It depends exactly how you quote Kipling, but on the whole, Jason, people should read Kipling, and he was an amazing commentator on a period of history. But Jason, isn't the important point here that we can define what's appropriate? Yeah, I understand that, but if people speak freely and it's not insightful, should they, if they're public figures, be punished for doing so? And that's my problem here. I think Theresa May, I think Brandon Lewis, who are out, it seems, to punish Boris Johnson, I think they're impinging upon the rights of free speech of other Conservative MPs.
Right, to offend people, and your idea of offence, you need to define, because if you are...
Incitement.
You're telling me
Incitement.
That you find the use of pickaninny to describe black people...
I said it was an outdated word.
But this is what Boris does.
Yes.
I'm quoting Boris. This is Boris. And you can't just say Boris being Boris. You have to understand the difference.
Should he be allowed to do so, though, Jason?
I don't think it's anyone's right to be racist or offensive to an entire cohort of individuals, and for you to conflate the baby blimp thing in London.
How many people? I mean, how many?
One individual.
But isn't it interesting, Jason, that so many of the Muslim community have now come out saying Boris absolutely should be able to say these things?
And that proves what?
Well, it proves that actually the concept that Boris has been racist and offended a whole religion is not the case.
No doubt you and I can find someone who would say it's my right to say pickaninny. We can find these people. I tell you what, Jason, honestly, there are lots and lots of callers I've had all week and commentators in my Sunday papers all saying the same thing. We're out of time. We're over time. It's a pleasure. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show. It is now 11:31. Well, Boris has certainly split opinions, hasn't he? You know, was he within his rights as an elected politician to use the words that he did? I think he was, even if it did cause offence to some, and my goodness me, it's dividing the Conservative Party. David Wall, the Secretary of the Midlands Industrial Council, organisation which has given many millions to the Conservatives over the years, said the row was an argument over relatively nothing and that Johnson should not be disciplined. However, Lord Andrew Cooper accused Johnson on Saturday of casual racism and the courting of fascism. Lord Cooper, who in the old days before the referendum was Andrew Cooper, whose company produced an opinion poll on the day of the referendum saying Remain were 10 points ahead. My gosh, that's a very well-deserved peerage, in my opinion. So, they're very split. But can I just widen this out, folks, a little bit, please? Because earlier on this week, the tech giants got together and banned Alex Jones's InfoWars from their platforms. Some of you will be familiar with what he has to say, some of you won't. But shall we say he is extremely outspoken, and Apple, Facebook, YouTube and Spotify all got together to ban him. And it is, I think, in the face of that, very, very interesting that Noam Chomsky, who is a really strong icon to many in America when it comes to free speech, and he's a professor at the MIT, and he's come out overnight saying, look, it's absolutely wrong to ban people. You shouldn't ban people. He says of Jones, what I've seen of him is outrageous. But unlike civil libertarians here in other countries, I don't think the way to deal with so-called hate speech and craze fabrications is to ban them, rather confront them. And I think that's absolutely right. I remember on this issue of free speech, when Nick Griffin got elected in 2009 to the European Parliament, people like Peter Hain becoming hysterical. He must be banned. He mustn't appear on the television. If he goes on Question Time, he'll sweep the country. And of course, I always took the opposite view. Griffin appeared on Question Time, did badly, people saw the arguments and rejected them. It is not... The sensible approach is not to ban people from saying things that you don't agree with. Now, I do accept there are limits to this, and incitement clearly is a limit. But is our free speech under threat? Well, I'll tell you something. From the tech giants, there does now appear to be an outright attempt to stop many Conservative commentators, either to ban them, to shadow ban them, or to make sure that through algorithm changes, they are not getting the same deal that they used to, and the same deal those on the Liberal left get. So I'm worried across the board that free speech is under threat, and I thank Boris, in a sense, for starting off this debate, because at least we are talking about it. Nigel, when someone as well placed as Boris criticises the burqa, he shouldn't use inciting words like bank robbers, said OJ. Nigel, the collateral effect of free speech is sometimes constructive offence. No offence, no free speech. Jack, I have to say I'm with you on that, and I've been fighting this argument and this corner all week. People complain that our politicians only say what people want them to hear, yet they want to restrict what they say. Let them freak freely, says Will in Nottingham. Let's go to Peggy, who's calling from Basildon. Good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. I hope Boris doesn't apologise. Free speech is under threat, and also they've got an agenda. Theresa May's got an agenda. She sees it as a threat. And since when has everybody got the right not to be offended? I don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, it is funny, isn't it? Because Ken Clarke talked about the burqa a few years ago and, called it a peculiar garment, and that didn't seem to cause, any great sense of outrage. And all right, Boris's words went further than that. But it's almost, Peggy, interesting, isn't it? It's almost as if the supporters of Boris or the opponents of Boris pretty much divide down the Brexit lines within the Tory party.
Well, because people are saying Us Brexiteers say what we think. The rest of them only please their pockets.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, who of course was on LBC presenting yesterday morning from 10 till 12, Jacob has sort of equated what is happening with this disciplinary panel to a show trial. Do you agree with Jacob's words?
Absolutely. I mean, it's all right to offend the President of the United States. They say it's all right for comics to say it, but not politicians. Well, what's that Sadiq Khan? He's a politician, and he offended, and he allowed that to offend the President of the United States.
Yeah, funny, isn't it? Actually, we had a caller earlier, Peggy, saying that 100,000 people marched to defend their rights of free speech, to say that President Trump shouldn't come to the country and speak freely. So actually, was it a pro-free speech demonstration or an anti? I think it was an anti one, actually. Peggy, I thank you. I'm going to move on to a new caller, Lloyd, who's calling from Oxford. Good morning.
Good morning. Hi there, Nigel.
So, do you feel that free speech is being impinged upon, or is the reaction to Boris sensible and proportionate?
That's okay, interesting question. Okay, so I suppose basically I think that freedom of speech carries with it, I suppose, a certain amount of special duties and responsibilities. And so it's not something that could be thought of as being absolute. You can't have freedom of speech in all situations, and it can be subject to certain restrictions, I suppose you could say.
Yeah, I mean, would that include, Lloyd, the right to cause offence?
So in certain situations, I think causing offence is perfectly all right. But what disturbed me about the Boris Johnson situation is that this is a chap who is being lauded as potentially a leader of the UK, of British government.
Yeah.
And to use those kinds of words that are used in the article seem completely unnecessary and unstatesmanlike, but they're being presented and supported by people in the media and by members of the public as if this is what we want. And it's going along the lines of Donald Trump, who I know you have a certain appreciation for, but I think it's a path down which I didn't expect the West to be going, at my age. I'm now 53, and I'm wondering whether we've reached a place where the public's frustration with the changes in the world that they're seeing and perceived threats to their ways of life are being used by certain leading figures to guide the public in a direction that could be quite dangerous.
Well, and I mean, you could argue, actually, Lloyd, that the direction that they're going against was quite dangerous. It, after all, kept taking us to war. It made the rich richer and actually the poor poorer. So we could argue politically around that. I mean, look, I do take your point, Lloyd, that maybe those words that Boris used, letterboxes and bank robbers, maybe they are not the appropriate words you would expect from a Prime Minister, and equally some of Trump's language and Trump's style of language, many in America have thought it's inappropriate for him to be president given the way that he speaks. I understand that. But Lloyd, on the specifics of was Boris, and you may not like the words, but was Boris within his rights in terms of free speech to say those things without being sanctioned by his own party? Where do you stand on that?
I guess I know. I can see where you're going with it. And I suppose you're right. And maybe Boris is right to be able to use those words, but the response to him, perhaps that's where I am at.
Yes, no, absolutely.
Is I feel is disappointing.
Yes,
because I would have thought, as soon as somebody said something like that, people would then think, who is this idiot? I don't want to be led by somebody who talks, who sits down and writes an article and decides to put those words in it. I would have thought people would say, this guy's an absolute fool. But he's done it. I think one of your previous callers mentioned pickaninnies and some of the things that Boris has said before. And he's a man of words. He knows what he's saying. And the fact that this type of rhetoric, if you like, is being appreciated is what is frustrating and upsetting, because we want more from our leaders than to
okay. And do you think, Lloyd, on a personal level, do you think less of Boris this week than you did last week?
I remember Eddie Mair who's now moved to RBC.
He has. That's starting quite soon. Yeah.
And he did an interview with Boris once, where he repeatedly, I think, said something like, "You're a nasty piece of work, aren't you, Boris?" And
I do remember the interview.
It was a very interesting interview. I think Boris Johnson's very well educated. He comes from the upper echelons of the UK society, but I think he's an absolute arsehole.
Thank you, Lloyd. We can do without that. Lloyd, thank you for your call. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusive in LBC. It's 11:46. Free speech, it matters. Well, somebody who is speaking freely this morning is Robert Wood Johnson, the US ambassador to the UK. Now, you may remember that Donald Trump reversed the Obama deal with Iran. At the same time Trump did that, the European Union reiterated their support for that plan. In essence, a freeing up of Iranian assets was meant to bring, not just improve wealth to Iran, but also the hope was that it would stop them being as active across the rest of the region. My analysis, and that I think of most neutral commentators, is that far from doing that, Iran actually have been spreading their doctrine ever more strongly than they were in the past, and in many ways using the money that's been freed up to do so. We find ourselves, as the United Kingdom, of course, guess which side we're taking? Well, we're taking the European Union side, not America's side, because we don't do foreign policy anymore. We don't govern ourselves. We don't think for ourselves. We do what Europe pretty much wants. Woody Johnson is arguing very passionately and saying to the United Kingdom, we are asking global Britain to use its considerable diplomatic power and influence and join us as we lead a concerted global effort. So here's the point. And I mentioned this a few weeks ago, the European Investment Bank, that EU institution, have now opened the doors to start lending again to Iran. I mean, the whole thing is incredible when they haven't stopped their nuclear ambitions, when they treat their own people in such an abominable way, and when they support organisations like Hezbollah all around their region. I do think, even if it was right to have a go at the deal that Obama put forward in 2015, it has clearly failed. I think we should support the Americans on this and not support the European Union on this. But guess what? With our Remainer Prime Minister and our Remainer Cabinet, we'll stick where we are. The interesting thing is this. If British businesses do business in Iran, what the Americans are saying is they will not do business with those British businesses. So there could be potentially something quite damaging to the UK economy here. And I'm not taking this position, folks, because I'm slavishly pro-Trump. I'm taking it because I think any grown-up analytical analysis says the Iran nuclear deal did not work and they are behaving abysmally. And frankly, and we've had callers into this show, I would like to see, I mean, that regime has been there for 40 years. It is the first Islamist regime that we saw in the world. It's been there all that time. It's been a disaster for the country. I didn't want regime change in Libya. I didn't want regime change in Iraq. I personally do want regime change in Iran. It would benefit the people. Back to free speech, Boris, the internet, people being banned. What does Matt in Reading make of the whole thing? Good morning. Hello, Matt.
But I will. Can you hear me okay?
I can now. Yeah, far away.
Yeah, sorry. Just a brief comment on the Iran thing. I wasn't calling about that, but if we are going to support America on Iran,
yep,
then America must stop supporting Saudi Arabia. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. If
well,
they block Iran, they must block Saudi Arabia as well.
Well, in a sense, Matt, you know, Iran and Saudi Arabia are two sides of the Shia-Sunni divide, aren't they?
Doesn't matter. You can't pick sides. You either don't support any of them or you support them all.
Well,
you can't pick and choose.
Well, you are right that under this regime they have forged much closer relationships with Saudi Arabia, although in return for reform, some would argue that reform is happening, some wouldn't. But Matt, moving on to free speech, where are the limits? Where are the rules? Did Boris, in your view, breach them?
Well, this is more... What prompted me to call was more the Alex Jones thing.
Yeah, no, go on.
Because my view is that it's not so much about what he's saying, it's about the influence and the reach that he has. Now, are you not sitting there in your LBC studio subject to regulatory guidelines. You can't say certain things on air, and you can't allow callers to say
Matt,
certain things on air either, can you? You have the button, for example, that you have to press if somebody says something that it's Ofcom. Right?
Ofcom exists. I mean, to be honest with you, Matt, in the 18 months or so that I've been here working at LBC, what this really applies to in terms of UK rules is to make sure that the counter-argument can be heard and that it is a proper debate and not a diatribe.
Right. Now, the problem with someone like Alex Jones is that he doesn't really have a counter-argument. He's not sitting in a studio debating with people. He's spouting drivel, in a monologue, which...
Well, you think it's drivel, Matt?
Well, I do think it's drivel.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and you are exercising your rights of free speech about him.
Absolutely, I am. But the point is this: standing on Speaker's corner and spouting the kind of drivel he has to say is one thing. You've got maybe a handful of people sitting there, but when your influence reaches the millions and you have the power, as Boris Johnson in fact does, I believe it is necessary to start holding you to a higher level of account. Now, at the moment, Facebook and YouTube and all of these things, they self-regulate. They are private corporations and they have that right. But I think there is an argument there, and there's a big trial that's been going on in America over whether, in fact, Facebook is a publisher.
Well, that's Matt. This is. I mean, I don't know whether you saw this, but I took on Zuckerberg directly when he came to the European Parliament face to face, and I said, "Look, if you're going to start banning conservative commentators or changing their algorithms or shadow banning them, stop pretending that Facebook is, as you've said repeatedly today and over the years, a platform for ideas. You've just become a publisher."
Well, yes, and I think they should be held as a publisher at least, and certainly with YouTube as an example, where you have gone over a certain what I call critical mass of following. I think you should be. You are then a broadcaster, and you should be subject to the same rules and regulations as every other broadcaster in the world.
But Alex Jones, Matt,
right and proper.
Alex Jones didn't get millions of followers by accident. He didn't. There isn't some magic here.
It doesn't matter how he got the followers. The point is, he got the followers, and whether or not you agree with what he says, the fact of the matter is he is in a position of influence and authority and power because of the platforms that he's enjoyed.
So don't you think, Matt,
he should be regulated?
Okay, no, fine, Matt. If there's some degree of regulation on what he does, I'm sure he'd live with that. But isn't banning him actually going to make him even more popular?
Well, there is that argument, but it's what they've really done is you have to remember something very important, Nigel, and that is that he hasn't been banned. He's been removed from having that platform. That's not the same thing as banning.
No, but it's
completely. His reach has been curtailed. That's a different thing altogether.
Yeah, and he's now found other means of doing it, and he's been very near the top of some of the other measures. Matt, I thank you for your call. I take the point. Alex Jones is absolutely enormous. Somewhere, somehow, has to be able to counter or challenge what he does. Let's go for the last caller this morning. Going to go to Lewis, a new caller from St Austell in Cornwall. Good morning.
Hi there, Nigel. It's awesome to speak to you. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well indeed. And you? So, come on, Lewis. Can you speak freely to me on this conversation, or are you worried there could be reprisals if you do?
To be honest, you hit the nail on the head right there. Honestly, it is draconian how things are these days. Like, as a young person speaking about it as well, like I'm not like I'm not in my 30s or anything like that.
Oh well, people in their 30s are so old, Lewis. I mean, it's amazing they've even got an opinion still, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, and I don't follow the hive mind like the rest of the people in my generation. That's the first start.
Okay,
but it's just, oh gosh, the whole thing with the Alex Jones situation, as the previous caller was mentioning.
Yep.
It's terrifying. Honestly, I've watched Alex Jones. I actually appreciated his content, so I'm not going to say that everything he says isn't out there, but to take someone off, they've turned him into a martyr. His app is like number 3rd on Apple at the moment.
Yeah.
Backfired.
I saw that, number 3. Yeah, no, remarkable. But Lewis, what about Boris? What about Boris? Is it poor old Boris? I mean, is he going to get hauled over the coals and disciplined by the Tory party? Is that right?
He did absolutely nothing wrong. He has everybody, yes, sure, it may have been somewhat out of taste for some people, but the fact is that we still maintain the right to free speech in this country. Like, how do I put it? Like, this isn't what my great-grandfather fought for. These are the sorts of measures that would have been introduced by the fascist party, for God's sakes.
And who are the fascists now, Lewis?
The left, honestly, it's getting more and more draconian.
Well, I would agree with you that the left have become more and more extreme, but the bizarre thing is, this was the so-called Conservative Party, where a Prime Minister demands an apology and a chairman puts him up before a disciplinary board. Lewis, great call. Some wonderful calls this morning. Great debate. I will be back tomorrow evening here on LBC at 7 o'clock. At 3 o'clock this afternoon, it's Andrew Castle. But up next, it's Ian Payne.
Thank you very much indeed, Nigel. Good